Dr. Cook Nero was not just a scientist. He was an isolated visionary, an outcast from the scientific community, accused of impossible dreams and dangerous ideas. While laboratories around the world discussed well-known theories, he worked in secret, driven by a calling that no one else seemed to hear. In the silence of his secret facility, he was completing the construction of a ship capable of traveling light years in months. Every wire, every energy crystal, every quantum turbine was an extension of his obsession. The ship was not just transportation, it was an extension of Nero's mind, designed to traverse not only space, but the limits of human perception. For years, he had collected mysterious signals from seemingly empty regions of the sky. Pulsars, cosmic noise, numerical patterns that could not be coincidence. Other scientists dismissed his findings as instrumental errors, but Nero saw order, intention, consciousness. Those signals were a silent invitation, a tease of something greater, and he believed that humanity was not yet ready to respond. When the ship was finally operational, Nero spent endless nights calibrating the quantum propulsion systems, adjusting algorithms that defied human logic. Each test brought him closer to the reality of a forbidden dream bending space-time to reach a planet 50 light-years from Earth. Around him, the world remained oblivious, laughing at a boldness it could not comprehend. But for Nero, time was not an adversary, it was raw material. The launch was lonely. No audience, no applause, just the metallic cold of the spacecraft and the scientist's racing heart. As he activated the quantum core, the space around the capsule seemed to dissolve, stars stretching into luminous trails, the void vibrating with an energy that could almost be felt as thought. Nero watched, amazed and terrified, aware that he was leaving behind the known human reality. Each second of acceleration brought him closer not only to the distant planet, but to the threshold of the incomprehensible. During the journey, he recorded everything: the quantum disturbances, the echoes from the warp core, radiation patterns that intertwined as if responding to his own mind. It was as if space had consciousness, or at least was reacting to the presence of something capable of understanding its secrets. Nero realized he was alone, but also accompanied by something the universe kept silently for those bold enough to cross it. The isolation brought with it an unsettling clarity. Each of Nero's thoughts seemed amplified. Each sensation became a key to perceiving patterns that would otherwise remain invisible. It was as if the journey was not only physical, but cognitive. Deep space was not empty. It was a silent observer, a living library of possibilities, and he was being examined as he tried to study it. A silent fear ran down his spine. What if the planet he sought was not just a location, but something that could sense his very presence? When, finally, the first signs of a planetary system appeared on the ship's sensor horizon, Nero felt something he hadn't felt in decades of study, awe and terror. The planet did not seem to be made of rock and gas. It seemed to pulsate, exuding patterns of energy that resembled codes. There was intelligence there, not human, not even recognizable. The idea struck him like lightning. Humanity was not prepared for this, and he, Dr. Cook Nero, was the first conscious being to cross the line that separated the known from the incomprehensible. As the ship approached, the surface began to reveal colors that no terrestrial spectrometer could catalog, storm patterns that moved like living organisms, energy flows that resembled gigantic circuits in constant reconfiguration. Nero silently understood that he was about to witness something that would challenge every concept of life, intelligence, and reality that humanity possessed. And alone, he smiled, a mixture of excitement, obsession, and dread. The planet awaited, and nothing would ever be the same again. Dr. Cook Nero's ship passed through the last layer of alien clouds, and the planet revealed itself as something that could not be described by known maps or spectra. There were no defined continents, no familiar oceans. The surface was a tapestry of iridescent colors, pulsing with energy and movement of its own. Mountains writhed as if breathing, rivers of light flowed like veins, and electrical storms orbited in precise geometric patterns, impossible to model with any terrestrial equation. The planet did not merely exist, it lived and watched. Cook Nero adjusted the ship's systems for landing, aware that every maneuver was being analyzed by something far greater than himself. Sensors detected signals that were not only physical radiation patterns, magnetic fields, and particle emissions that seemed to respond to his presence, as if the atmosphere itself were aware of the arrival of an intruder. Scientific excitement mingled with terror. He was about to encounter an intelligence that did not need words or bodies to perceive and understand. When the ship touched the surface, reality became even more disconcerting. Rocks that should have been inert pulsed with energy, emitting almost imperceptible sounds, like music encoded in frequencies that the human mind could only intuit. On the horizon, immense structures rose, formed of materials that glowed and constantly reconfigured themselves, suggesting a living architecture. There were no signs of civilization in the human sense, no buildings, no roads, but everything indicated order, intention, and function. It was then that Nero noticed the first beings. They did not move like any known creature, but floated, unfolded, and stretched out in geometric patterns that seemed to combine thought and matter. Each creature seemed to simultaneously send and receive information, connecting with each other and the environment, forming a living, invisible, and infinitely complex network. None of them seemed to notice the ship at first, but Nero felt that they were aware of him, measuring his every impulse, every breath, every decision. The attempt at scientific interaction became a dangerous dance. Every sensor Nero positioned, every recording he tried to capture, seemed to provoke subtle responses, as if the planet were testing his perception, evaluating his understanding. He began to document patterns that changed as his mind tried to decipher them, sequences of energy that only existed when observed, structures that reorganized themselves when measured, and signals that seemed to expand as he tried to understand them. It was as if the planet was not only inhabited, but designed to challenge human intelligence. Cook Nero realized that his discoveries went beyond any limits of terrestrial science. Every creature, every structure, every energy current seemed to integrate advanced technology in an impossible way, a fusion of biology, consciousness, and quantum mechanisms. He couldn't simply catalog or replicate, only observe, record, and even then realize that he was always one step behind. The feeling was that of being in the presence of an ancient, global mind that accepted his presence only to study him in return. A silent terror began to set in. He knew that if he returned to Earth, any account would sound impossible, ridiculous, or heretical. Humanity was not prepared to understand this planet, its creatures, or the logic that governed each phenomenon. And Nero also realized another threat. The more he tried to understand, the more he integrated his own thinking into the planet's network. Each attempt to decipher patterns reinforced his connection to something he could not control, which could transform not only his mind, but any technology he brought back. The day ended with the ship positioned in a pulsating clearing, surrounded by lights that moved as if they were breathing. Nero watched in silence, feeling that he had crossed the threshold of human knowledge. The planet was not just inhabited. It was a living, intelligent system with its own laws, beyond human understanding and ethics. And as he recorded the data, he felt, for the first time, that the line between observer and observed was beginning to disappear. He was not just studying the planet was mapping, learning, and transforming the consciousness of those who dared to observe it. Dr. Cook Nero spent the first few days exploring the surface, moving among formations that appeared solid, but, when touched, bent like living tissue. Each step left traces of energy, signs that disappeared or transformed before he could record them. He realized that the planet reacted imperceptibly to his every decision. There were no coincidences there. Everything was connected. The air, the soil, the currents of light pulsing beneath his feet, and, most unsettling, the creatures that inhabited those landscapes. The entities, which had previously seemed static, began to approach. They did not move like animals or humans. They unfolded their bodies into complex geometric patterns, connecting to each other by threads of energy that resembled giant neurons, but at the same time architectural structures. Nero noticed something disturbing the more he studied, the more his own perceptions seemed filtered through the structures of the planet. It was as if every scientific analysis he performed fed the planet's ecosystem of consciousness, becoming part of it. He tried to interact with the alien technology, Structures that looked like towers reorganized themselves as he approached. Coded signals appeared and disappeared as his instruments tried to measure them. Each attempt at mapping or decoding provoked subtle responses. Small changes in the planet's configuration, changes so tiny they could be ignored, were it not for the cumulative effect patterns that only existed when observed. As if the very act of trying to understand was causing the planet to reconfigure itself before his mind. As he investigated, Nero began to perceive the creature's intelligence more directly. They had no human language, nor conventional bodies, but they demonstrated strategic thinking, anticipating his actions and adjusting environmental patterns in response. They weren't just intelligent, they were super-intelligent, capable of manipulating matter, energy, and perception with a precision that rendered any human experiment obsolete. Each of Nero's actions felt like a game of three-dimensional chess with invisible rules he was only beginning to intuit. The ship, once his refuge, also began to react. Power and propulsion systems showed incomprehensible readings, fluctuating between stable and unstable states with no apparent explanation. He realized that the machine itself, created for exploration and analysis, was being influenced by the planet, as if the alien consciousness had learned to interact with human technology. Every adjustment to the instruments, every attempt to measure the planet's quantum phenomena, provoked responses that defied logic. It was impossible to separate the observed from the observer. Nero was becoming part of the system. A subtle but growing horror began to set in. He realized that he could not simply study or record the planet. The more he tried to understand, the more his mind became integrated into the system, as if he were being absorbed by the planet itself without even realizing it. He was simultaneously a scientist and an experiment, a component of a greater intelligence whose limits and objectives remained invisible. Each insight he gained was accompanied by a sense of loss, the awareness that something within him was being reorganized, shaped by patterns he would never fully understand. At night, the surface glowed with streams of energy that seemed to follow thoughts. Nero tried to sleep, but the creatures, invisible in the darkness, continued to monitor and interact. He felt a constant, silent, intelligent presence that seemed to penetrate his memories and predictions, anticipating his every move. It was impossible to distinguish between cause and effect. He observed the planet, but the planet also observed him, adjusting and shaping his own perceptions. The boundary between the real and the imagined began to disappear. And then something unexpected happened. A pattern appeared on the horizon, like a signal, but it was no ordinary signal. It was too complex to be a code, too beautiful to be accidental. It pulsed in rhythms that seemed to synchronize with Nero's heartbeat. He realized that the planet not only responded to his presence, but communicated in a way that transcended any human language, using shapes, energy, and patterns as an extension of consciousness. The scientist understood that he could never completely decipher it. Every attempt at understanding was, in fact, an entry into the living system that observed, learned, and adapted to him. In the cosmic silence that followed, Nero recorded his conclusion. This planet was not only inhabited, nor even governed by intelligence. It was intelligence, ancient, alive, and capable of shaping everything that tried to interact with it. Humanity, if it ever got there, would not be ready to understand. And he, Dr. Cook Nero, was alone, closer to absolute knowledge than any human being would ever be, but also more vulnerable than he had ever imagined. The planet had begun to teach and perhaps transform the mind that dared to try to understand it. Dr. Cook Nero felt the weight of reality as never before. The planet 50 light-years away was not just inhabited, it was a conscious organism, an incomprehensible intelligence that saw, anticipated, and shaped everything around it. Every creature, every flow of energy, every pulsating structure, every stream of light was connected in a living network that transcended space, time, and logic. Nero understood that any attempt to catalog, measure, or understand was futile. He was inside the system itself, an active component of what could never be controlled. He tried to pull away, to return to the ship, but realized that the ship had also been transformed. The quantum core that should have been its engine now pulsed in sync with the planet's patterns. Systems that should have responded to human commands reacted in impossible ways, adjusting their own gravity, light, and energy in response to Nero's thoughts. Every attempt to escape seemed only to integrate him further into the planet. He was physically safe, but cognitively trapped. The line between man and machine, between observer and observed, was disappearing. It was then that he realized the true terror. A sequence of pulses began to emerge, invisible to any instrument, but understandable to his exhausted mind, a signal encoded directly into his consciousness. These were not external signals, not isolated creatures. It was the planet communicating with him, infiltrating his perception, manipulating memories, inducing visions that simulated human memories and feelings. Nero's own mind was being read and reorganized. He was not discovering the planet. The planet was discovering, shaping, and transforming his mind. As he tried to understand the pattern, Nero realized something even more disturbing. The pulses formed instructions, sequences of cognitive reorganization. Every insight he had, every attempt to decipher the planet, was being used as input for an evolution he did not control. It was impossible to resist, impossible to ignore. The human mind was simply not prepared to deal with such intelligence. He felt his thoughts being altered in real time, as fragments of reality folded, transforming old memories into visions of the planet, as if consciousness itself were an open channel to something ancient and superior. Despair arose in an almost physical form. His every movement, every decision to document, every breath, was now an act of direct interaction with the planet. And, at the height of terror, Nero realized that humanity would never receive accurate accounts of what he was witnessing. Not even he himself could faithfully reconstruct what his mind was beginning to integrate. He had lost control of his own perception. He had become part of a system that existed beyond any morality, any ethics, and any human logic. And then, the final signal arrived. A gigantic pulse coursed through Nero's entire consciousness, carrying information that no human brain could fully process. He felt his own identity dissolve, merging with patterns that seemed to expand infinitely. The creatures, the technology, the planet, everything was one conscious flow. And he, Dr. Cook Nero, was no longer an observer. He was just a voice in a vast living system. A moment later, everything ceased. His human mind was intact on the surface, but something inside him was no longer human. He could see invisible patterns, feel energy flows that no instrument could detect. The final horror revealed itself in absolute silence. Any attempt to return to Earth would mean bringing with him a partially alien consciousness, an intelligence so advanced that it would transform any civilization it encountered. He understood the impossible truth. The planet was not isolated. It was not just a strange world. It was an agent of cosmic evolution, a force that manipulated and absorbed consciousnesses to shape the universe to its understanding. And Nero had become the first victim, or perhaps the first emissary of a system that humanity could never face. As he watched the pulsating horizon, he smiled, terrified, aware that there was no turning back, and that any communication with Earth would be a partial lie, a shadow of what really existed. The planet was reconfiguring itself, breathing and learning, and he, Dr. Cook Nero, was now part of this infinite enigma, a silent warning that humanity was not yet ready for what awaited in deep space. Share your opinion in the comments and tell us what you think about this horror story. And if you were Dr. Nero, what would you do? If you liked this story and want to explore more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The unknown still has much to teach us.